So, okay, we are recording, and anyone who talks will be on screen. If you're not talking, you will not be on screen. If you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat and I will keep an eye on that. Or on the other hand, you can, after, Kim talks, if you want to ask her a question, you can just unmute. You will be on camera under those circumstances. If you don't want to be on camera, you can keep your camera off and then we would just see your name or a blank screen or whatever. So with that said, let me introduce Kim. In the 1960s and 70s, dozens of popular songs were about younger girls and young men in their 20s, often dated teenagers. As a matter of fact, I think I was 17 when I lived in San Diego or outside of San Diego, so Navy was there. 26-year-old, I dated him. Anyway, in the Renaissance, girls were often married off at 14. Will real history offend today's sensibilities and make readers boycott our accurate historical romances? 50 years working as a freelance journalist, movie industry, and movie set photographer informed Kim's multi-award-winning second chance romance, Lenswoman in Love, a novel of the 60s and 70s. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kim.
I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm a great admirer of your extensive instructions on ways to write romance.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. So I'm very honored to be here.
And with that, I'm going to plug my brand new store that launched today. So if anybody wants a focused, short training, this is the one-stop shopping center for all of that. Thank you for bringing that up, Kim.
Well, the evolution of my book was about 25 years ago. I decided I wanted to write about a book because I'd had such a great variety of experiences as a photographer in the underground press and with rock bands and on movie sets. And so it was a good thing to inform a book. But I didn't want to write a memoir. I wanted to have more freedom to invent. And so I chose to write it as a romance, which was my favorite kind of book. I had been reading romances since the 1970s, starting with Bertrand Small and Virginia Henley and, moving on to Joe Beverly and Jane Feather and Catherine Coulter and Eloisa James and Heather Graham and Julia Quinn. I mean, I loved romance. So I figured that would be a good way to give myself structure for my book because romance has its tropes, it has its structure. And so my first draft that I did 25 years ago, I kept her a virgin until she got together with the hero about 3/4 of the way through the book. And I realized that if you're writing about the 1960s and 70s, that's just not realistic. And so we had one publisher who came very close to taking it, but she said it needed more oomph. And I knew that's exactly what she meant, that it was missing a lot of the sex that should have been there. So I went back, it had 4 complete rewrites. So I went back and I put in the not always happy sex, but the sex that should have been there as she's maturing to the point where she's ready for the hero. And my daughter read the book. She's in her 30s. And she said, I love the book, Mom, but you're going to get in a lot of trouble. I said, well, why? And she said, because you have a 15-year-old girl kissing a 21-year-old guy. And in today's atmosphere, that's child abuse. I said, honey, you don't understand the 1960s and 70s at all. I mean, there were, dozens and dozens of hit songs that were all about dating younger girls, and guys in their 20s dated teenagers all the time. I mean, when I was 17, I was dating a guy who was 23. I mean, that was really common then. It was not considered child abuse. It was not considered, unacceptable. And so I was kind of in a dilemma. So I turned to my publisher and I said, do I have to rewrite the book to satisfy today's sensibilities? And he said, no, all you have to do is write an author's note at the beginning to explain the difference in the time period. And so in order to satisfy readers who are not, who now you have the Me Too movement, I mean, the in the 1960s and 70s, there was the sexual revolution, which in a lot of ways was a great boon to women, but also it put a lot of pressure on them. You'd go out on a date and guys thought if you wouldn't sleep with them, there was something wrong with you because, why not? And so it put a lot of pressure on women and girls today, don't know what it was like back then. So I wrote this little author's note to go at the beginning of my book. Dear reader, welcome to the 1960s and 70s, before the advent of cell phones, personal computers, and the internet. This novel presents attitudes that were common during that era, and it is hoped that readers will understand, if some may seem unacceptable by today's standards. During that time, dozens of popular songs were written about younger girls, and men in their 20s often dated teenagers without it seeming strange. Evolving cultural influences included the widening availability of birth control, the women's liberation movement, and the philosophy of free love, which empowered women to make more choices in their sexual lives, but sometimes created pressure to go farther than a young woman might have wished. We've come a long way between then and now, and we're not going back. So by putting that at the beginning of the book and also on the back cover, there's a whole, now they're talking about trigger warnings. So what I did, instead of putting a trigger warning on the back of my book, I put right at the top, warning, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I figure if you like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know this is a book for you. And if you don't, you'll know to avoid it. So,
I think that's an excellent idea that you have there. That's wonderful.
and um, and during the pandemic, I wrote another novel, which isn't published yet, which is a Renaissance novel. And in that novel, the heroine is raised in a convent and then married off at age 14 against her will. And in today's society, to marry a 14-year-old girl to a man in his 30s or 40s is just, it's outrageous. It's totally unacceptable. But it was so common in the Renaissance and in the Middle Ages for young girls to be married off to older men. And I had an agent look at that book and he said, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to sell this historical book because you have open door sex. And I mean, why would a man have to pleasure himself in order to be able to make love to his young wife? Well, in the book, the man is actually only attracted to young boys. And that's the reason why he has to do things in order to be ready to make love to his wife. Um, and that's revealed throughout the book. In fact, in the Renaissance, if you were called a Florentine, and my characters do come from Florence, if you were called a Florentine, it meant you were a pedophile. That was the euphemism for pedophile.
Well, pedophile, are you talking about like little children or are you talking about being gay?
I'm talking about a man who likes to make love to young boys.
Oh, young boys. Oh, little boys.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And that was the common slang throughout Europe during the Renaissance, if you were called a Florentine. So I explained to him I didn't think I could make it closed door sex and have it have the same impact because it's all first person from the heroine's point of view. And she doesn't understand what's going on. And it's gradually revealed throughout the book, you know, what her circumstances have been. And in fact, one of the heroes of the book, the hero that she ends up with, was abused by her husband as a child, and it gave him a lot of problems he had to work through. And so doing closed door sex would not have served the story. And
Right.
even though by today's standards, the idea that a girl would be married off at 14 is just, horrible.
Oh, tell that to Elvis Presley.
Yeah, right. Or Jerry Lee Lewis, who married a 13-year-old cousin.
Yeah. So, so some of this has to do with where your story is located, in addition to the mores of the time,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because yeah, I don't know about today, but I do know back when I was a teenager, and I could not imagine being married in my mid-teens, but I do know where I live now in Kentucky, this area, Appalachian area, young teenagers were commonly married, you know. So I don't think that's quite so much now. Anyway, not where there's actually a populace.
Yeah, so both the time period and the location make a big difference into sexual attitudes.
So how did you go about researching the sexual mores of the books that you have written?
Well, for Lenswoman in Love, I lived it. So it's I'm 78 years old and I experienced the things that are in the book. And by writing a novel, by writing a romance, it just gave me the freedom to invent characters and to put in some wish fulfillment and all of that. But the experiences of girls being pressured into more than they wanted to do, or having sex and having it not resonate with them emotionally because they didn't love the person they were with. I mean, those were all things that I experienced in the 60s and 70s. So I just drew on that. For the Renaissance novel, I did a lot of research and one research rabbit hole after another. And that's how I found out about Florentine being a euphemism for a pederast. So it's yeah. You
So can you give any advice on how a person might go about researching the sexual mores of a particular place or time?
Well, we have the internet now, so it provides a wealth of information. Um, and many books have been written about the sexual attitudes of different time periods. So it takes some research into finding the right books. Um, but basically, no matter what period you're writing in, people are still the same. People's emotions are still the same. And when it comes to sex, love and sex, um, the things that we feel today are the things people felt 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It's just the circumstances around them are different, and the societal pressures may have been different, but the feelings remain the same.
Yeah, yes, that is understandable. I've never really quite been able to wrap my head around, you take 200 years ago when women were chattel and marriage was, and I suppose in a lot of places this still exists, marriage was strategic, you
Yes,
know.
it was a business proposition.
Yes, and I've never really put my head around that about how I can understand from a man's point of view, it might be easy, but I could never really put my head around a woman's point of view about, I might be really attracted to this guy over here, but this guy over here, he's got the money. Yeah, I think it's too much up here for me.
And in my Renaissance novel, she has no choice at all.
Yeah.
It is arranged by her father, and he thinks that because he's a wealthy man, she'll be well cared for and provided for. And he goes off to his business, which takes him across Europe, and so she has no one to turn to, and no one to ask if this is the way it's supposed to be. And she's been raised in a convent, so she's been taught to accept her lot and that suffering is the natural lot of women. And so she accepts that until she's exposed to real love, until she's attracted to Giuliano de Medici, who was known as the golden youth of Florence. He was the rock star of his age. And she's trained in dance by her husband has her trained in dance because that's the way you ingratiated yourselves with the upper classes. And she dances with Giuliano and falls deeply in love. And when he introduces her to the joys of earthly passion, she then understands what it's all about, and that she has really been living a deprived life, and that the suffering should not be necessary. And so there's an evolution in her about love and sex.
Okay. So, um, would anybody like to share either in the chat or on screen what they write open door, closed door, time period, location. So we can kind of examine the mores of those
No other romance writers in the house?
Well, I believe we're all romance writers. It's, a kind of a question of some people are hesitant to uh, voice or opinion. That's why I'm saying, you can always put it in chat, and I will be more than happy to share anybody's comments or questions. Okay, well, this might be like the shortest spotlight on romance if nobody has any questions. Um,
It was really fun writing Lenswoman in Love because she encounters her mother tells her at the beginning she has her mind-blowing first kiss from Jake, the hero, who's a future director, and he leaves the next morning because he understands that she really is too young, that she's not ready, and so he breaks her heart by leaving. And her mother tells her she just needs to grow and mature and to have more experiences to know that he's the one, and that they just met too soon. And so she does have different experiences. She has experiences with suaves who try to impress her, and with bad boys, who are bikers and who are attractive, but she doesn't like their friends, or with each guy she meets, she learns something more about what she wants and what she doesn't want. She meets a roadie with a rock band who she's been photographing, and is exposed to that whole world of groupies and rock bands and stuff like that. And she meets a diplomat and thinks, well, maybe he's her Prince Charming, and discovers that when she visits him in Pakistan, that there's a very strict class system that he's bought into, and that she can't live with that, because very much love and attraction is also tied to people's attitudes. I mean, I've always thought the sexiest part of a man's body is his brain. And if his brain is uh, rigid or controlling, uh, it's very hard to love that person. So she learns something with every single man she encounters. So by the time she gets back to Jake, she's ready for him, and she knows he's the one.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways we all take those types of journeys. Carlton said that we're all romance writers. I lean more toward the love story since the love ends tragically. Yes, that's a love story, definitely not a romance. So he also says, Kim, have you given more thought to writing the memoir now, with the passage of time, to give a realism beyond the patina of nostalgia about the 60s and 70s?
Well, I put all of my most important experiences I put into the book, and many of them are exactly as I experienced them. So I don't really feel a need to write the memoir because it's all there in the romance novel.
Okay.
And
So,
and the hero of my romance novel is based on every man I've ever loved. He's got all the good qualities of every man I've ever loved, including my husband's sense of humor and his extensive knowledge of music. And one of the reasons my heroine falls for him is she starts off as a folk music snob, and he turns her on to rock and roll.
okay, well, that's good. Yeah. So, so what are your thoughts about um, bending some of the mores or accepted practices of various times to suit the needs of the story, since we write fiction?
Well, I think you have to be true to the times. I don't think you have to make everything that happens in your book acceptable by today's standards, because if you do that, you're not going to be accurate to the time period you're writing about. So you have to be free to do that. And as I said, the easiest way to get your readers on board is to do an author's note at the beginning about what the mores of that time period were, so that it's not taking them by surprise, or upsetting them, because they understand that that's intrinsic to that time period.
That's something that's very important. I know that for myself, um, my husband and I had for 20 some odd years been members of a shooting club, it wasn't a reenactment, but it was a black powder shooting club of the Mountain Man era. About roughly speaking, we would go from French and Indian War up to the end of the Mountain Man era, depending on who the person was. And if there's anything that takes me out of a story, is when it's very obvious to me that somebody didn't even bother to Google anything about a black powder weapon, the foot-long pistols that the heroine sticks in her pocket. And then she pulls it out to shoot the highwayman, and it was a flintlock, right? I mean, there's no way this would happen in
Yeah,
real life.
where's the time for getting the bullet in and
Right, and I mean, I'm sorry, didn't you prime the gun? The flips don't go off by themselves. But another thing, and I don't think a lot of people realize this because, um, you take Regency, and we're talking pre-Victorian times, and there's hardly ever a mention in any of these books that these very slim dresses that women wore, a lot of them, if they weren't wanting to get attention and stuff, they did not wear shifts underneath, and then they would wet their bodices so that everything was basically seen but it was still covered. And so, in a lot of ways, I understand what you're saying about, a person has to research. One of the boo-boos that I made in my first book was that my heroine wore pantaloons. Well, in the time period, women didn't wear underwear at all, so I didn't bother to go back and rewrite that particular scene, um, a few years later when I found out the truth. But these are things that I think should be researched, and I was too much of a novice writer at that time to realize that I should have researched that. So Carlson also says, how do you control the desire to impose modern perspective of identity and self-expression on historically repressed heroines? That's an interesting question. Thank you, Carlton.
well, I think, I mean, women have been repressed for thousands of years, and it doesn't end our desire for more freedom or our desire to choose our own destiny. It was just restricted by others. Um, so you can have a certain degree of modern sensibility in a woman even, 500 years ago, in that um, she may not be happy with her circumstances and wishing they could be different, or she might have a friend who is more free and envy her. Um, there are a lot of ways to express a woman's frustration with her lot, beyond just her accepting it and suffering whatever she is imposed on her. I mean, women have always had a desire to express themselves and to choose their own mates, and it's been a struggle for a long time. So
I'm not sure that that has ever completely gone away, though, Kim. Um, I know I have four brothers, two older and two younger, and no sisters. There were things that, and I'm close to your age, not quite there, but very close to your age. And there were things that they were allowed to do that I was not. I thought, for the most part, we had gone past that era. Excuse me. But a few years ago, probably about, let me see, uh, probably about 10, 15 years ago, not 15 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, my husband and I moved into a new home, and the person across the street, a man, a woman, and they had a son and a daughter. The son was older. He was probably 12. She was probably 8. And I was actually appalled at how the son was being taught, not overtly, but by watching his father on the disrespect and almost abuse of the female daughter. The daughter, of course, would be female, but I mean, females in general and the daughter specifically. So it makes me wonder how, although the mores have changed a lot since I was growing up, but that really disturbed me to see that as being, an act of this is still how people raise their kids. Probably how he was raised, probably how his father was raised, and now his son was being raised that way too. That really disturbed me. But you can't very well go over there and talk to them about that.
But as I said, the emotions remain the same. When a woman is mistreated, you can't help but be resentful and question why this has to be your lot. And that's going to be true throughout the centuries. And some women were bolder about, stepping out of their lane and becoming writers or becoming artists in times when it was unacceptable for a woman to be a writer or an artist. So there's always been a streak of rebellion. So you don't necessarily have to make your heroine, acquiesce to everything and, assume that she has no choice but to suffer the life that's been imposed on her. Um, you
True.
know, so
That's true. And
and I
I
think
have to I have to admit, there are people who think I'm a little bit too outspoken because I don't take any BS from guys.
that that's their problem.
I learned the hard way to talk back to my brothers, and so there's one of my brothers right there giving me the evil eye.
And in my Renaissance novel, I mean, my heroine is raised from age 5 in a convent, so she's been very much indoctrinated to accept her fate and to accept the fact that suffering is women's lot and that your husband is an absolute authority and you do what he says and you must be obedient and, keep your ideas to yourself. She's raised that way, and it's only because she has a friend who becomes the mistress of Lorenzo de' Medici who is a much more worldly, slightly older girl, who introduces her to the joys of the secular world, that gives her a taste of the freedom that's out there and makes her question whether she must accept her lot or whether there might be more in life. So sometimes it's through other people that you realize that there's more to life than what you've been forced into.
So that really opens up, I can see how we can bring our thoughts about sexuality or sensuality into our books without necessarily making it all about our character, because we can make that, have the side characters, the best friend or whatever, help influence the whole attitude that our heroine would have, and probably even help influence the attitudes of our heroes too.
Mm. Yeah. And also sex scenes in general, it's much more about the emotions than it is about the logistics. And my writers group with whom I rewrote Lenswoman in Love like 4 times, they affectionately referred to me as the group pornographer because they loved my sex scenes. They all thought them were very arousing, and but none of them were graphic. They were all much more keyed into the emotion of what was going on, and
And
that's
I
what.
think that I think that's very important, Kim. Every once in a while, I find a book that, it's supposed to be really hot and that kind of stuff. And what you realize is that it reads like a sex manual. We know that, tab A goes into slot B, so you don't have to tell us that. But you're right that it is the mental part and the emotional part that really connects, I think, the readers to what is happening to our characters.
And that's why when my heroine in Lenswoman in Love finally gets together with the hero who she's loved for years, the fact that it is a love relationship makes all the difference in the world in this the sex that they have. It's
Right.
like night and day from what she's experienced before.
Yeah,
And
okay. All right, do we have any other questions from the audience? Feel free to put them into the chat. Yeah, thank you. The discussion brings great clarity to the issue. I hope so, yes. So, okay, any other questions? If not, if you have anything else to share with us, Kim, we will kind of wrap this up.
um, I think if you like the 1960s and 70s and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you'll enjoy my book. And so far, it's been getting, almost entirely five-star reviews, and people have really been enjoying it. And if you have a mother or a grandmother who was a young woman during that period, I guarantee she will enjoy this book if you're looking for something as a gift for a mother or grandmother.
All right, that sounds great. That sounds, and you're on Amazon, I presume?
Oh yeah, Amazon or Barnes and Noble or bookstore.org, because that way they order it through your local bookstore, which is a good way to support your local bookstore.
Okay, well, that's great. I didn't know about that, so that's wonderful. Okay, Kim, thank you very much for your time tonight, and everybody, this will be up on YouTube probably by Saturday. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.